At 3:12 in the morning, I stared at the unknown number glowing on my phone, almost hitting decline. 9 months ago, my wife buried our marriage with a single sentence. "The twins aren't yours. They are my boss's." But the hospital wasn't calling to apologize tonight. A panicked voice delivered a new nightmare. "If you do not get here right now, one baby might not make it, and the doctor needs to discuss genetic testing." My name is Cora Nelson. I am 37 years old. I live alone in a temporary rental apartment in Greyhaven. It is a lifeless place, beige walls, empty shelves. It is a place for people waiting for the dust to settle. The digital clock on my nightstand burned the time into the dark. 3:12 a.m. My phone vibrated against the cheap wood. The screen flashed bright. North River Women and Children's Center. I stared at the screen long enough to let it ring twice. Every part of me wanted to let it die. Instead, I swiped right. I pressed the cold glass to my ear. "Is this Cora Nelson?" The voice was tight, professional, strained. "Speaking. I am calling from North River Women and Children's Center. Your wife, Wren Calloway Nelson, was just admitted. She is undergoing an emergency cesarean section. There are severe complications. You are listed as her primary emergency contact." The words hit me like physical blows. My wife. She was not really my wife anymore. Not in the ways that mattered. I sat up in bed. The apartment was freezing. "Those babies are not mine," I said. My voice sounded hollow. "Dead." Wren made that very clear. She said they are her bosses. Silence on the line. I could hear the hum of electronics. Then, the nurse took a ragged breath. The man listed as the biological father was contacted. He refused to come. He told us to stop calling. I closed my eyes. Typical. Grant Whitmore cared about his pristine public image. He did not care about messy hospital realities. "Ms. Nelson," the nurse pressed. Her voice dropped an octave. "The doctor needs to speak with you right now. It is extremely urgent." I stared at the shadows stretching across my bedroom wall. Let him deal with it, I thought. Let Grant deal with the disaster he created. I was done. I was completely done with her. "I am sorry," I said. I prepared to end the call. "There is nothing I can do." "Wait, please." Through the receiver, the background noise suddenly spiked. It was not just the low hum of a hospital, it was pure chaos. Monitors shrieked. A sharp, mechanical wailing cut through the air. Someone shouted for a crash cart. Footsteps pounded against linoleum. The sheer panic in those overlapping sounds made my blood run cold. I froze. The phone remained pressed to my ear. 9 months ago. Wren stood in the living room of our home in Bryan County. She had not bothered to cry. She had simply taken off her wedding band. She dropped it on the kitchen counter. The metal made a sharp, final sound against the granite. She looked me dead in the eye and delivered the killing blow. "You cannot give anyone a real family." Cora. That was what she had said. She packed her bags. She walked out to build a perfect life with a man who had money, power, and everything I lacked. Now, that powerful man was ignoring his ringing phone. The alarm in the background of the call blared again, a high, desperate pitch. Those were babies, 2 infant lives being dragged into a world that was already failing them. Wren had betrayed me. Wren had destroyed me. But the children did not ask for any of this. They were alone. They were dying. Maybe. "I am on my way," I said. I hung up. I did not bother to dress properly. I threw a faded gray hoodie over my sleep shirt. I pulled on a pair of loose sweatpants. I grabbed my keys and ran out into the night. The rain was coming down in thick, blinding sheets. It was a torrential downpour. It turned the roads of Greyhaven into slick, dangerous rivers. I got into my sedan. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I pulled out too fast, then forced myself to slow down. The roads were flooding, and every slick turn felt like a threat. The windshield wipers slapped back and forth in a frantic rhythm. Every red light felt like a trap. Every shadow looked like a warning. I gripped the wheel so hard my hands ached while neon streetlights bled across the rain. My mind raced faster than the engine. In my line of work as a financial risk analyst, I deal with probabilities. I calculate worst-case scenarios. I quantify disaster. But there is no mathematical model for this. Why was I rushing toward the woman who had shattered my reality? Because of the alarm. Because of that terrible, piercing sound over the phone. I pulled into the hospital parking lot 25 minutes later. I left the car crooked in a visitor spot. I did not care if it got towed. The rain soaked right through my clothes in the 10 seconds it took to reach the entrance. The sliding glass doors of the emergency room parted with a soft hiss. I bypassed the main triage. I ran straight for the elevators. The maternity ward was on the 4th floor. I stepped out of the elevator into a different world. It was freezing in here. The air smelled of industrial bleach and sterile cotton. The overhead fluorescent lights were blindingly white. They cast zero shadows. It was a brutal, unforgiving brightness. I walked down the long corridor. My wet sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum. Squeak, squeak, the sound echoed off the empty walls. I felt entirely out of place. I was drenched in rainwater. I was wearing baggy sweatpants and a soaked hoodie. I looked like a ghost haunting a place I did not belong. Around me, nurses in blue scrubs moved with terrifying speed. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. I reached the main maternity desk. "Wren Calloway Nelson," I said to the clerk. "I am the emergency contact. I was called—" The clerk looked up. Her eyes were wide. She typed something into her keyboard. "Wait here." I stood there. My heart hammered against my ribs. 1 minute passed, then 2. The silence of the waiting area was deafening compared to the chaos I had heard on the phone. A set of double doors swung open down the hall. A woman walked out. She was wearing surgical scrubs and a protective cap. Her mask was pulled down around her neck. Her face was pale. It was lined with exhaustion and grim determination. She carried a clipboard tightly against her chest. She locked eyes with me. She marched straight over. "Are you Cora Nelson?" she asked. "Yes." "I am Dr. Miriam Vale." She did not offer her hand. Her gaze was intense. It was a look that stripped away everything else in the room. It was not just professional concern. It was something heavier, something deeply unsettling. I braced myself for the news. "Wren is gone. I thought, or the babies did not make it." I dug my fingernails into my palms to anchor myself to reality. Dr. Vale stepped closer. She lowered her voice so the clerk could not hear. "Ms. Nelson," she said quietly, "before we discuss the baby's condition, I need to ask you a very strange question." I opened my mouth to answer, but the question never came. The smell of disinfectant, the word babies, the sight of her face, it tore open everything I had spent 9 months trying not to relive. I spend my days analyzing disaster at Alderstone Risk Analytics. My entire job is to look at a company portfolio and predict exactly how, when, and why everything might fall apart. I am a financial risk analyst. I live by rules, by established precedents, by cold and hard data. My wardrobe consists of navy blazers and sensible shoes. I have always preferred the safety of the background, keeping my head down and ensuring the numbers balance perfectly. Wren was the exact opposite. We met at a local charity gala several years ago. I was standing near the back of the room, nursing a glass of sparkling water, when she walked up and simply inserted herself into my evening. She worked in brand communications. She was magnetic, loud, and ruthlessly ambitious. She wore a bright crimson dress that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. We were fire and ice. She pulled me out of my rigid shell, and I grounded her more chaotic tendencies. It felt like the perfect equation. We balanced each other out. 3 years after that gala, we got married in a quiet courtyard ceremony. We bought a modest, 2-bedroom townhouse in Bryan County. We painted the walls warm colors and planted hydrangeas by the front steps. We were building a foundation. We wanted to fill that second bedroom with a child, to create a family of our own, because we were 2 women. Biology required a complicated workaround. After months of research and discussion, We decided on reciprocal in vitro fertilization. It was a beautiful, symmetrical plan. We would use my eggs and donor sperm, and Ren would carry the pregnancy. She desperately wanted the physical experience of motherhood, the glow, the feeling of life growing inside her body. I just wanted my family line to continue, to see my grandmother's eyes or my father's chin on our child. It was our way of tethering ourselves together completely. We chose Laurel Creek Fertility Institute. It was wildly expensive, but they had the highest success rates in the state. I underwent the grueling hormone injections, the physical discomfort, the surgical retrieval. We celebrated with cheap champagne when the clinic told us we had managed to create multiple healthy, viable embryos. We thought the hardest part of the journey was over. We were completely wrong. The first embryo transfer failed. The blood test came back entirely negative. The grief was a physical weight that crushed the air right out of our small townhouse. We had spent tens of thousands of dollars, drained our savings, and poured our souls into the process, only to end up with empty hands and a hollowed-out marriage. People grieve in different ways. I retreated into my spreadsheets. To make up for the massive financial crater the clinic left behind, I took on 4 new corporate accounts at work. I stayed at the office late into the night. I thought that providing financial security was how I could fix us, how I could build the safety net back up. Ren, however, felt entirely abandoned. She stopped talking to me about the future. Instead, she fell down the endless rabbit hole of the internet. I would come home at 8 or 9 at night to find her bathed in the harsh blue light of her phone screen, endlessly scrolling through pictures of wealthy mothers, luxury European vacations, and perfectly curated lives. She started complaining about our small house. She criticized my boring, stable job. She became obsessed with our lack of social status. Then, she landed a senior communications position at Halcyon Brand Systems. It felt like a lifeline at the time, a fresh start for her career. Halcyon was a massive corporate conglomerate. Her new boss was the chief executive officer, Grant Whitmore. Grant was a man who practically sweated arrogance. He was flashy, relentlessly charming, and deeply manipulative. He was a man who drove a sports car that cost twice as much as our mortgage. He treated his employees like disciples, and he demanded absolute devotion to his pristine public image. I should have seen the red flags. It is literally my profession to identify red flags. But I was so exhausted, so consumed with keeping our bank accounts in the green, that I ignored every single one of them. I ignored the text messages that chimed on her phone at 11 o'clock at night. Ren claimed it was just standard crisis management for high-profile clients. I ignored the sudden appearance of a designer leather handbag that I knew for a fact we could not afford. She told me it was a generous corporate bonus for a successful marketing campaign. I ignored the private, late-evening dinners she attended, which she casually passed off as exclusive career mentoring sessions with Grant. I wanted her to be happy again. I wanted her to feel successful and validated. I willingly closed my eyes to the predator who was slowly infiltrating my home. The ultimate betrayal did not start with a grand declaration. It started with a tiny administrative detail I failed to question. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, several months before our marriage finally imploded. I was sitting at the kitchen island, clearing out our shared email inbox, archiving old utility bills and deleting junk mail. I clicked on a message from Laurel Creek Fertility Institute. The subject line read, "Important notice regarding annual embryo storage renewal." My heart did a strange, painful flutter. I had tried very hard not to think about the remaining embryos frozen in liquid nitrogen. They felt like ghosts of a future we had paused indefinitely. I called out to Ren, who was doing her makeup in the adjacent bathroom. I asked her if she wanted me to pay the annual renewal fee with our joint credit card. She walked out, applying mascara, looking completely casual. She waved her hand dismissively in the air. She told me she had already handled it all. She said she had transferred the clinic billing to her personal account to manage it easier, and that I absolutely did not need to concern myself with it anymore. I handled it all. "Do not worry about it," she had said. I trusted my wife. I let the matter drop. I pressed a button and deleted the email from the shared inbox, completely unaware that I had just watched her hand over the keys to my unborn children. 9 months ago. The air in our home smelled of roasted rosemary and garlic. I had spent 3 hours in the kitchen preparing our anniversary dinner. I bought 2 expensive steaks. I polished our good wine glasses. I wanted the evening to be a quiet reset for us, a moment to breathe away from the crushing weight of my spreadsheets and the blinding glare of her corporate ambitions. I carried the plates into the dining area, expecting to find her pouring the wine. Instead, Ren was sitting on the edge of the living room sofa. Her posture was rigid. She wore plain gray sweatpants and a faded shirt. Her face was completely bare of makeup. That was the first terrifying sign. Ren never let anyone, not even me, see her without her armor. I stopped walking. The plates grew heavy in my hands. I asked her what was wrong. She did not look at me. She stared straight ahead at the blank television screen. Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth or hesitation. "I am pregnant," she said. "It is twins." For exactly 1 second, my heart leaped into my throat. A chaotic, desperate hope flared inside my chest. I thought of the clinic. I thought maybe a miracle had happened. Maybe our doctor had made a mistake about the failure. Maybe we were finally getting our family. Then, she turned her head. Her eyes met mine, and they were entirely dead. "They are not yours," she said slowly, making sure every single syllable hit its mark. "They are Grant's." The plates slipped from my grip. They shattered against the hardwood floor. Ceramic shards and hot food scattered across the planks. But I did not feel the splash of grease on my ankles. I could not feel anything. The room spun wildly out of focus. It was not just the infidelity that destroyed me in that moment. People cheat. Marriages end. But she had taken the one dream that was supposed to be sacred to us, the very thing we had bled and bankrupted ourselves for, and she had used it to dig my grave. She used the dream of motherhood to bury my trust alive. I asked her why. I asked her how she could do this. My voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger. Ren stood up. She did not apologize. She did not cry. Instead, she looked around our modest living room with absolute disgust. "Because Grant can give me a different life, Cora," she stated. Her tone was terrifyingly rational. "He is securing a penthouse in the city. These children will go to elite private schools. They will grow up with a network of actual power. I am tired of playing small. I am tired of clipping coupons and worrying about mortgage rates. Grant is offering a future that is actually in the proper class. You could never give me that." I stood frozen amidst the ruined dinner. She walked over to the entryway console and picked up a thick manila envelope. She tossed it onto the kitchen counter. "These are temporary asset division papers," she instructed, her voice dropping into a businesslike cadence. "My lawyers drew them up. I need you to pack your things and leave quietly by the end of the weekend. Do not make a scene. Grant and Halcyon Brand Systems cannot afford a public scandal. It would ruin the company image, and it would ruin my career." I walked over to the counter like a machine. I pulled the documents out, pages and pages of legalese, stripping our shared life down to cold percentages and arbitrary settlement figures. I was numb. I flipped through the stack blindly. Near the back of the packet, a specific page caught my eye. It looked different from the financial documents. It had the header of a medical facility. The bold text at the top read, "Authorization for Reproductive Records and Information Update." My brain was short-circuiting. I pointed to the page. I asked her what it was. Ren did not even blink. She reached out and flipped the page over quickly. "It is just a standard insurance liability form," she dismissed smoothly. "Since we are separating, I need to update my individual health coverage so they do not drop my prenatal care. Just sign the bottom." In that level of shock, my analytical mind simply shut down. The logo registered, but I did not process it. The fine print might as well have been static. I took the pen she handed me and signed wherever she pointed. The next 48 hours were a blur of high-functioning depression. I had no fight left in me. I packed 2 suitcases, left the keys on the counter, and moved into a tiny gray studio on a short-term lease. I became a ghost. I woke at 6, took the train to the office, stared at risk models until 8 at night, and returned to an empty room. I paid my half of the lingering bills. I existed, but I was not alive. The isolation was compounded by the digital torture of modern life. Every time I opened my phone, the algorithm fed me her new reality. I saw pictures of Ren dining at exclusive rooftop restaurants. I saw her lounging on a massive corporate yacht, her pregnant belly barely visible under designer silk. Surrounded by smiling executives, I saw the comments congratulating her on her glamorous new chapter. I was completely erased. I was replaced by a better, wealthier, shinier upgrade. I tried to bury the past completely, but 4 months into my self-imposed exile, a tiny crack appeared in the perfect narrative. I was sitting at my office desk when a notification popped up on my computer screen. It was an automated email from Laurel Creek Fertility Institute. The subject line read, "Storage Transfer Adjustment." I opened it. It was a generated invoice for a minor administrative fee of $75. The text body was vague, mentioning a recent update to the primary account holder parameters. My stomach twisted. I pulled out my phone and sent a text message to Ren. It was the first time I had initiated contact in months. I typed out my question, asking what was going on with the clinic account. The typing bubble appeared on my screen almost instantly. 3 seconds later, her reply arrived. System error. The clinic updated their billing software. I already called them to fix it. Ignore it. I stared at the glowing words. My thumb hovered over the screen. I was tired. I was so incredibly tired of dealing with her, of thinking about the clinic, of remembering what I had lost. I closed the message thread. I clicked on the email from Laurel Creek. I hit the delete button, sending the only real clue I had straight into the digital trash bin. Dr. Miriam Vale led me away from the busy reception desk. We entered a small, windowless consultation room just off the main surgical corridor. The door clicked shut behind us, cutting off the chaotic sounds of the maternity ward. The air inside felt heavy, thick with the smell of industrial sanitizers and cold fear. "Your wife suffered a severe placental abruption," Dr. Vale began, her tone clipping along at a relentless, clinical pace. "She lost a catastrophic amount of blood during the emergency surgery. She is currently on a ventilator in the intensive care unit. She is in a medically induced coma. She cannot provide us with any medical history or consent." I nodded slowly. The words felt completely detached from my reality, like I was listening to a news report about a stranger. "Okay," I said. "And the babies?" Dr. Vale leaned forward, placing her hands flat on the metal table. "We delivered 2 premature infants. The first baby is small but stable. The second baby is crashing. We are seeing signs of a rare immune-related blood reaction. The baby's body is destroying red blood cells and platelets. We need to start a specialized transfusion immediately, and we need a confirmed genetic match to guide treatment safely." "Then call the father," I snapped. The anger finally broke through my protective layer of shock. "Call Grant Whitmore. He is the one who created them. This is his mess." Dr. Vale tightened her jaw. Her eyes flashed with a sudden, sharp frustration. "We did call him. The hospital administration called his private number 4 separate times over the last hour. When he finally answered, he screamed at our staff. He said, and I quote, 'This has nothing to do with me. Do not ever call this number again.' Then he turned his phone completely off." I let out a harsh, bitter laugh that scraped against my throat. Of course he did. Grant Whitmore was a man who only cared about perfect optics and corporate dominance. The moment his pristine, curated life cracked and a messy, life-threatening hospital crisis appeared, the powerful chief executive officer vanished into thin air. "We are running out of time," Dr. Vale pressed, ignoring my reaction. When I pulled Ren's complete, unredacted medical history from the state database, our network flagged a cross-reference from a few years ago. It showed an extensive in vitro fertilization cycle at Laurel Creek Fertility Institute. It listed you as her legal spouse and a direct participant in the egg retrieval process. Ms. Nelson, I have to ask you, Is there any possibility whatsoever that you share a biological connection to these children? I stared at her as if she had lost her mind. I stood up so fast that my plastic chair scraped violently against the linoleum floor. Absolutely impossible, I stated, my voice shaking with a potent mix of fury and disgust. We stopped our fertility plan entirely after the first failure. She looked me dead in the eye and told me this pregnancy was the result of an affair. She told me she slept with her boss. Those are his children. I have zero biological connection to them. Dr. Vale did not flinch. She crossed her arms over her clipboard. Patients lie. Ms. Nelson, biology does not lie. There are glaring inconsistencies in her prenatal paperwork regarding the paternity timeline. Right now, I have an infant whose organs are beginning to fail. If there is even a fraction of a percent of a chance that your genetics are involved, I need to swab your cheek and run a rapid DNA panel. If you're not related, it will at least give us a baseline to rule out certain maternal antibodies. Will you consent to a rapid test? I wanted to walk out. I wanted to push past her, leave this entire nightmare behind, and drive back to my empty, safe apartment. But the thought of a newborn suffocating inside a plastic incubator anchored my feet heavily to the floor. I rolled up the wet sleeve of my gray hoodie. Do the swab, I ordered coldly. Prove to yourself that I have nothing to do with this so we can move on. Dr. Vale signaled a nurse standing outside the room. The nurse rushed in, swiped a long cotton swab aggressively against the inside of my cheek, drew a quick vial of my blood, and sprinted down the hall toward the laboratory. The wait began. It was the longest 45 minutes of my entire existence. I sat entirely alone in the stark waiting room. The hospital air conditioning was freezing against my damp clothes. I wrapped my arms tightly around my chest, shivering from the rainwater and the sheer adrenaline crashing through my veins. Every single time the double doors swung open, my muscles locked into place. I was furious. I was terrified. Ren had dragged me back into her toxic orbit without even being conscious. I was sitting here, waiting on medical results for the offspring of the man who had stolen my future. It felt like a sick, twisted psychological game. I watched the second hand on the wall clock tick past every number, each motion amplifying the dread pooling in my stomach. Finally, the heavy wooden doors swung open again. Dr. Vale walked slowly toward me. Her professional, clinical armor was completely gone. She looked pale, almost sickly. She held a digital tablet in her hand, her knuckles bone white from gripping the casing so tightly. She did not ask me to come back into the private consultation room. She stopped right in the middle of the open waiting area, standing directly in front of my chair. I stood up slowly. So? I asked, my voice dry and hollow. You ruled me out. What is the next step? Dr. Vale shook her head. She looked down at the tablet screen, then back up at my face. Her eyes were wide with a horrifying realization. Ms. Nelson, she began, her voice dropping to a trembling whisper. The rapid array panel just came back from the lab. The markers are undeniable. She paused, taking a sharp, ragged breath. You are not just someone who can provide medical support right now. You are the genetic mother of both of these babies. The walls of the hospital hallway seemed to violently cave in on me. The buzzing of the fluorescent overhead lights turned into a deafening roar in my ears. I could not breathe. My lungs simply stopped working. That is insane, I choked out, stepping backward until my shoulders hit the cold plaster wall. That is a mistake. She was sleeping with him. She told me she was pregnant with his kids. It is not a mistake, Dr. Vale insisted, stepping closer and holding up the glowing screen. Look at the data right here. This is not a natural pregnancy resulting from an affair. The genetic material is a direct 99.9% match to your profile. This is a twin gestation resulting directly from the embryos you and your wife created at the fertility clinic. Your eggs were used. My mind violently rewound. It flashed back to the memory of that single deleted email from 9 months ago. The storage transfer adjustment, the administrative fee. She told me she handled it all. Ren had not just broken her marriage vows. She had not just had an affair to climb the corporate ladder, she had stolen our frozen embryos. She had taken my biological children, implanted them without my legal or medical consent, and orchestrated a massive, elaborate lie to make me willingly walk away from my own flesh and blood. It was a calculated medical crime of unimaginable proportions, and the truth was currently fighting for its life inside a plastic box just down the hall. The sheer impossibility of the situation paralyzed me. I had spent 270 days mourning a dead future. Now, that exact future was fighting for oxygen in an incubator just down the hall. My brain struggled to process the magnitude of the theft. The woman I loved had weaponized my deepest desire against me. Yet, despite the paralyzing betrayal, I did not hesitate for a single second. I grabbed the digital pen from the doctor. I signed every medical consent form, every blood transfusion authorization, and every legal waiver she pushed across the metal table. I was operating on pure, primal instinct. I was no longer the discarded spouse. I was a mother showing up to save her child. A nurse guided me through the secure double doors of the neonatal intensive care unit. The room was bathed in dim, artificial blue light. It hummed constantly with the sound of mechanical ventilators and rhythmic cardiac monitors. I walked slowly toward the far corner of the room. There they were, two tiny plastic bassinets side by side. The infant on the left was small but breathing steadily on her own. The infant on the right, however, was a terrifying maze of transparent tubing, intravenous lines, and a massive respiratory mask. I stepped closer. I pressed my hands flat against the warm plastic shield of the stable incubator. I looked down at the tiny, fragile face. My breath hitched violently in my throat. It was not a vague, ambiguous resemblance. It was an undeniable echo of my own family line. The slight cleft in her tiny chin was an exact replica of my father. The sharp, arched curve of her brow was mine. The visceral gut punch of biology hit me harder than any laboratory data ever could. The ridiculous, impossible truth settled deep into my bones. They were real. They were mine. Around 6 a.m, a different nurse tapped my shoulder. She whispered that the surgical patient had regained consciousness in the intensive care recovery wing. She said my wife was frantically refusing to speak to any medical staff until she saw me. She did not ask for the powerful chief executive officer. She did not ask for the man who supposedly fathered her children. She asked for the woman she had completely thrown away. It was the ultimate proof that her carefully constructed lie was collapsing. I walked out of the neonatal unit and marched down the long corridor. The searing anger in my veins had crystallized into pure, unbreakable ice. I pushed the heavy door to her room open. Wren looked entirely defeated. The glamorous corporate director was gone, replaced by a pale, exhausted woman tangled in sterile hospital sheets. She reached a trembling hand out toward me as I approached the bed. I did not take her hand. I stood rigidly at the foot of her bed. I looked down at her with absolute zero empathy. The hospital had to run an emergency genetic panel to save the crashing twin, I stated evenly, my voice devoid of any warmth. You told me the children were your boss's. You looked me right in the eye and said they were his, but they are mine. Wren swallowed hard. Her monitors beeped erratically. She tried to shake her head, attempting to maintain the illusion out of sheer, desperate habit. She whispered a weak, fragmented denial. I cut her off instantly. I leaned over the metal bed rail. Do not do that. Do not play games with me while my child is bleeding out in the next room. I saw the Laurel Creek authorization file. I know about the frozen embryos. I know exactly what you did. The mention of the fertility clinic shattered her remaining defenses. A ragged sob ripped through her chest. She covered her face with her shaking hands. The ugly, horrifying truth finally poured out of her in broken sentences. It was a heavily calculated arrangement. Grant needed a specific, unshakable family narrative for reasons tied to his corporate power. He found out about our remaining embryos during one of their private evening meetings. He formulated a monstrous strategy. He offered to secretly fund the implantation, provide her with immense wealth, and elevate her career to the absolute top tier in exchange. She had to forge my consent, carry the pregnancy, and stage a brutal, undeniable affair so I would leave our marriage voluntarily. The goal was to ensure I walked away completely broken, never once thinking to fight for custody of children I believed belonged to another man. She had literally sold my children to secure her own luxury penthouse. I stared at the woman I had once promised to protect for the rest of my life. I asked her how she could possibly sleep at night knowing she had traded my flesh and blood for a corporate promotion. Ren looked up at me. Her eyes were bloodshot and wild with panic. "I was going to tell you," she choked out, tears spilling onto the white pillowcase. "I could not take the guilt anymore. I planned to confess everything to you weeks before the delivery date. I told Grant I wanted out of the deal." She gasped for air, clutching the hospital gown near her collarbone. "But he laughed at me. He told me if I ever breathed a single word to you, he would absolutely destroy my entire life. He promised to tie me up in endless corporate litigation, frame me for financial embezzlement, and make sure I completely disappeared from the industry forever. I was trapped. He owned me, and he owned them." I walked out of the intensive care unit and let the heavy door swing shut behind me. The crushing weight of the betrayal did not break me. Instead, it flipped a switch deep inside my brain. I am a risk analyst. When a catastrophic system failure occurs, you do not sit in the rubble and cry. You secure the remaining assets. You trace the liability. You prepare for war. I pulled out my phone and dialed June Barrett. June had been my family lawyer for years. She was the one who reviewed the temporary asset division papers 9 months ago and told me they smelled rotten. It was 4:45 in the morning, but she answered on the second ring. I explained the situation in sharp, rapid sentences. I told her about the embryos, the forged timeline, and the crashing infant in the neonatal ward. June did not waste time offering useless sympathy. She is a bulldog in a tailored suit, and she immediately shifted into tactical gear. She gave me 3 immediate directives. Number 1, secure a hard copy of the rapid genetic panel results directly from the attending physician before anyone could bury it. Number 2, demand the hospital administration freeze all of Ren's and the infant's medical files to prevent any unauthorized digital alterations by outside parties. Number 3, file a formal, legally binding block against discharging the children to any third party without a direct court order. I executed the first 2 steps within 15 minutes. Then, I sat down on a hard plastic bench in the quiet hospital hallway. I opened my secure work laptop. I needed to understand the mechanics of the theft. I bypassed the standard firewalls and dug into the joint financial histories I had meticulously archived during our separation. I know exactly how wealthy people hide dirty money. They never use direct transfers. They use layers. I traced the timeline back to the months just before Ren dropped her fake affair story. I found a series of peculiar, massive credit card payoffs on her personal accounts. I cross-referenced the routing numbers. They led to a subsidiary holding company. I tracked that registration directly to the Whitmore family office. Then, I found the real smoking gun. There were substantial, indirect payments flowing from that same Whitmore account to a shady medical brokerage firm. It was a shadow company known for expediting concierge healthcare for the ultra-rich, completely bypassing standard insurance channels. Grant had literally bought the clinic's blind eye. While I was running the financial data, a night shift nurse walked by my bench. She paused, looking at me with a mix of pity and hesitation. She had been observing the chaos all night. She leaned in and quietly shared what she had personally seen. Ren rarely came to prenatal appointments alone. Men in custom suits came with her and often answered questions before she did. The nurse said the whole situation felt controlled from the beginning, like someone had been managing access to the pregnancy long before tonight. By 8 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was June. She had filed an emergency injunction and pulled heavy legal strings to get a preliminary data log subpoenaed from Laurel Creek Fertility Institute. The clinic records showed a direct authorization order to thaw and transfer our frozen embryos. It was activated right around the time Ren and I were experiencing our worst marital strains. Just weeks before she demanded I move out. June was not working alone. By sunrise, she had 2 associates, a forensic consultant, and an emergency filing clerk moving in parallel. The electronic signature on the consent form bore my exact name, but June is ruthless. She had her team pull the digital metadata attached to the file. The document was signed from an Internet Protocol address registered directly to the corporate headquarters of Halcyon Brand Systems. I did not sign that paper. On the exact date and time stamped on that digital file, I was standing in a conference room in Chicago, giving a risk assessment presentation to a room full of banking executives. I had the flight records and hotel receipts to prove it. The puzzle pieces snapped together with horrifying clarity. This was not a simple marital betrayal. This was a highly coordinated corporate conspiracy. It was forged digital signatures. It was the malicious misappropriation of biological materials. It was blatant medical fraud. It was a calculated, multi-million-dollar plot to strip a woman of her legal right to motherhood. I walked back into the recovery room to confront Ren one last time. She was already crumbling under the weight of her own guilt and physical exhaustion. I did not yell. I just laid out the metadata and the financial routing numbers. Ren started dropping the rest of the pieces. She confessed that Grant was never just a glamorous lover. He was a predator who had meticulously found her weak spots. She admitted she had accumulated massive, hidden credit card debt, trying to keep up with the wealthy, elite lifestyle she craved so desperately. Grant found out about the debt. He weaponized it against her. He used her intense work pressure and the dangling promise of a massive executive promotion to back her into a corner. He systematically manipulated her until selling our embryos and destroying our marriage felt like her only means of survival. I left her weeping quietly in the hospital bed. I felt absolutely nothing for her. I walked back down the cold, sterile corridor to the neonatal intensive care unit. I stood outside the thick glass window, looking at the 2 fragile lives tethered to an array of loud, blinking machines. They were breathing because of my genetics. They were fighting because they had my blood. Grant Whitmore thought he could write a massive check, forge a digital document, and buy a human legacy while treating my body and my embryos like tradable corporate assets. He thought I would quietly fade into the background like a good, obedient victim. He calculated the risks completely wrong. I pressed my palm flat against the cold glass of the nursery window. I made a silent, unbreakable vow to the 2 tiny infants sleeping inside. I was not just going to win my children back. I was going to systematically dismantle Grant Whitmore's entire life, and I was going to burn his corrupt system down to the ground. He did not wait for the sun to fully rise before launching his offensive. By Tuesday morning, an aggressive legal courier handed me a thick envelope outside the hospital cafeteria. The letter inside was drafted by a notoriously vicious corporate law firm. It did not mention genetics or forged signatures. Instead, it painted a grotesque, fictionalized picture of me. I was categorized as the unstable. Estranged ex-spouse. The document accused me of exploiting my former wife's traumatic postpartum crisis to illegally seize custody of children that were not mine. Simultaneously, the public relations machine at Halcyon Brand Systems began churning out manufactured rumors. They did not issue an official press release. They used whisper campaigns. Anonymous sources leaked calculated statements to industry blogs and society pages, vaguely detailing a deep, personal relationship between the chief executive officer and his brilliant communications director. They flooded the narrative so effectively that anyone reading the news would automatically assume the children were the natural result of an office romance. Grant was building an impenetrable wall of public perception. Then came the legal pivot. Grant's attorneys filed a preemptive motion claiming that even if the embryos were originally mine, I had legally abandoned them. They argued that because I allegedly stopped paying the annual storage fees, my rights were automatically forfeited under standard clinic policy. It was a brilliant, terrifying half-truth. Ren had intercepted the billing, intentionally creating a paper trail of my supposed financial neglect. Without the original, unaltered server logs from the clinic to prove she hijacked the account, his lawyers could easily sway a judge to terminate my parental claims completely. The fallout immediately spilled into my professional life. When I walked into the Alderstone Risk Analytics office on Wednesday, the atmosphere was freezing. My department director called me into his glass-walled office. Halcyon was one of our most lucrative clients, bringing in millions of dollars in consulting fees every single year. My boss did not care about my stolen children. He cared about the bottom line. He warned me, in a low and dangerous voice, not to drag the firm into my messy personal divorce. An hour later, I was nearly marched out of the building by security. An anonymous complaint flagged a doctored email in the company network. The fabricated message made it look exactly like I was actively abusing my high-level security clearance to harvest Halcyon's confidential financial data for a personal revenge campaign. It took me 3 grueling hours with the IT department to prove the timestamp was spoofed and my terminal had been remotely accessed. I narrowly avoided immediate suspension, but the message was crystal clear. Grant was showing me that he could reach into every single corner of my life and burn it to ash. That evening, as I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage, my burner phone rang. I had bought the cheap prepaid device just hours earlier to bypass any potential corporate surveillance. The voice on the other end was cultured, cold, and rigidly composed. It belonged to Celeste Whitmore, the legal wife. She did not call to defend her husband. She called because she was running an audit of her own. We agreed to meet in the dimly lit back booth of a quiet diner on the outskirts of the city. When she arrived, she slid a sleek leather folder across the table. Celeste made it very clear that she did not trust me completely. However, she despised being made a fool. She had discovered a series of heavily encrypted financial disbursements buried deep inside the family trust accounts. The expenses were categorized under a shadow fund titled the Legacy Program. "My husband has a God complex," Celeste told me, stirring her black coffee methodically. "But he also has a biological failing he would rather die than admit. He became absolutely obsessed with securing an heir roughly 14 months ago. This was months before your wife ever announced her convenient pregnancy. He was moving capital to secure a lineage long before he started sleeping with his employees." Armed with that timeline, June went straight to the family court judge the next morning. She bypassed the custody debate entirely and focused strictly on the immediate threat of medical interference. Using the sheer weight of the genetic match and the suspicious financial routing numbers, June secured a temporary restraining order. It legally blocked Grant from accessing the neonatal unit, obtaining any pediatric medical records, or using his corporate influence to transfer the infants. Grant was furious. Through backdoor legal channels, we heard his absolute rage. He was not used to being told no by a judge, but he was far from defeated. He still controlled the narrative, the wealth, and the people on his payroll. We needed the raw, unaltered data from the fertility clinic to prove the forgery and completely shatter his abandonment defense. June and I were sitting in her office, drafting the final subpoena to rip the clinic's digital archives wide open. Her desk phone rang. June answered it, listened for exactly 10 seconds, and the color completely drained from her face. She hung up the receiver and looked across the desk at me. The clinic administrators at Laurel Creek had just issued an emergency notice to the court. They claimed their primary storage network had suffered a catastrophic, unrecoverable server error overnight. Every single piece of digital evidence proving the fraudulent transfer of my embryos was currently in critical danger of being permanently erased. Grant thought he was completely untouchable. He believed that a well-timed server wipe would bury the truth under a mountain of digital ash, but he grossly underestimated the wrath of a betrayed wife. Not me, his own wife. Celeste had anticipated this exact maneuver. Hours before the clinic administrators conveniently announced their catastrophic system failure, Celeste deployed an independent forensic data architect she had quietly kept on retainer. They bypassed the clinic's primary firewall at 2 o'clock in the morning, creating a perfect, encrypted mirror of the entire administrative database just moments before Grant's malicious code could execute the server wipe. June and I sat in her office, the heavy mahogany doors locked tight, staring at the decrypted logs glowing on her computer monitor. The data revealed a conspiracy far darker than a simple stolen clinic account. Grant had not just hacked a medical facility, he had weaponized his own corporate infrastructure. Halcyon Brand Systems offered a premium corporate wellness and family planning program to its executives. Grant used hidden, back-channel administrative privileges to mine the confidential health questionnaires of his top-tier employees. He cross-referenced internal insurance claims, therapy logs, and reproductive assistance inquiries. That was how he found the exact details of Wren's prior in vitro fertilization cycles. It was a staggering, federal-level violation of medical privacy. He had literally hunted his own staff for biological material. But the real goldmine was buried in a heavily guarded legal dossier Celeste had provided from the Whitmore Family Trust. Grant was entirely sterile. He had been diagnosed with irreversible infertility over a decade ago. He kept it a fiercely guarded secret because the Whitmore corporate empire was built on a draconian, patriarchal foundation. His late father's ironclad will stipulated a massive transfer of power, absolute voting control of the conglomerate, along with access to the primary offshore trust funds, would only transfer to Grant if he produced a legally established direct descendant before his 40th birthday. That specific deadline was arriving in exactly 3 months. Grant needed a baby, and he needed it instantly. A lengthy adoption process would not satisfy the board's archaic obsession with blood legacy, nor would it happen fast enough to secure his empire. When he illegally accessed Wren's file, he did not just see a talented communications director, he saw a desperate, ambitious woman with viable embryos already sitting in a freezer, conveniently tied to a fracturing marriage. He orchestrated the entire nightmare with terrifying precision. He bought off the clinic director with untraceable shadow funds. He forged my digital signature to bypass the spousal consent laws. He funded the expedited embryonic transfer. Then, he commanded Wren to sell the narrative of a passionate, reckless office affair to ensure I would walk away without asking for a paternity test. Later that afternoon, I returned to the hospital to confront Wren with this new reality. She was sitting up in bed, looking like a hollow, transparent shell of the vibrant woman I once married. Her hands shook violently as she handed me an encrypted audio file hidden deep inside her phone. I finally learned the second twist of the knife. Wren had not simply been blinded by the promise of penthouse suites and elite private schools. Grant had systematically backed her into a lethal, inescapable corner. Months before the pregnancy was initiated, Grant had intentionally routed compromised, highly illegal offshore vendor contracts through Wren's specific departmental login. He created a flawless digital paper trail of severe corporate fraud with her name plastered all over it. When she initially balked at his insane proposition to steal our embryos, he dropped the fabricated evidence squarely on her desk. He told her she could either give him the children and live like a queen, or face 20 years in federal prison for embezzlement. He promised to make sure she never worked in the industry again. I pressed play on the audio file. It was a covert recording of a private meeting in Grant's executive suite. His voice was chillingly smooth, completely devoid of any human empathy. "She is a risk analyst," Grant's recorded voice echoed in the sterile hospital room. "But she is also deeply insecure about her inability to give you a natural family. Play on that. Use the affair. Break her confidence completely. Just let her believe she is useless and disappear. She will walk away without a fight. If you do not execute this properly, I will hand these vendor files to the authorities tomorrow morning." I stopped the recording. The silence in the hospital room was suffocating. My chest physically ached with a complicated, nauseating grief. I looked at Wren. Really looked at her for the first time since the night she took her wedding ring off. She was a coward. She had actively lied to my face. She had shattered my heart, destroyed our home, and allowed my biological children to be treated like black market commodities. The deep, agonizing pain of her betrayal would never fully wash away, but looking at her trembling hands and tear-streaked face, I finally saw the complete picture. Wren was a deeply flawed accomplice, but she was also a terrified hostage. She had been hunted, manipulated, and ruthlessly exploited by a predator who viewed human lives as mere stepping stones to his inheritance. I walked out of the room without saying a word. I dialed June's number as I marched down the corridor toward the neonatal intensive care unit. We had the motive, the method, and the definitive confession. June laid out our new rules of engagement. We were going to run a relentless, dual legal strategy. Tomorrow morning, we would hit the family court with the force of a hurricane to secure absolute, immediate custody of the infants, locking Grant out of their lives forever. And once my children were safely protected by the law, we would unleash the criminal and civil evidence to the authorities, the medical board, and the Halcyon shareholders. We were going to dismantle Grant Whitmore piece by piece. The heavy oak doors of the family court swung open at exactly 9 o'clock on Thursday morning. The emergency hearing for medical decision-making and temporary custody was officially in session. Grant Whitmore did not walk in looking like a criminal. He glided into the room flanked by 4 men in $10,000 suits, projecting the aura of a deeply slandered victim. His lead attorney wasted zero time. He immediately submitted a thick binder of fabricated context to the judge. He pulled out high-resolution, intimate photographs of Grant and Wren dining at secluded restaurants. He produced printed copies of private calendar appointments and a highly detailed, countersigned financial commitment document. The lawyer wove a compelling, tragic narrative of a genuine workplace romance that had simply resulted in an unplanned pregnancy, painting me as a bitter, unstable ex-spouse trying to hijack his biological children out of pure spite. I gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table until my fingers went numb. I wanted to scream, but June Barrett placed a firm, grounding hand on my forearm. She was a master of courtroom pacing. She did not throw our entire arsenal at them right away. She kept her focus razor-sharp on 2 singular objectives. She needed to establish my genetic motherhood, and she needed to prove Grant illegally interfered with the conception. June called our independent data architect to the stand. The expert methodically broke down the electronic signature on the embryo transfer authorization. He confirmed, under oath, that the Internet Protocol address traced directly to the executive floors of Halcyon Brand Systems on a day I was hundreds of miles away. But Grant's attorney was a shark. On cross-examination, he aggressively twisted the narrative. He badgered the expert, asking if it was technologically possible that I had simply given my wife my passwords to handle our medical billing. A common practice among married couples, the expert had to concede it was theoretically possible. The judge frowned. The absolute certainty of our digital evidence suddenly felt murky. The tension in the room thickened, and then my phone buzzed violently against my leg. It was an urgent text from Dr. Vale. The smaller twin in the neonatal intensive care unit had spiked a sudden, dangerous fever. They suspected a severe blood infection. The court called a strict 60-minute recess, and I sprinted to my car. I drove frantically through the city traffic, tears streaming down my face, completely terrified that my baby was going to die while men in expensive suits debated her legal existence. I spent 20 agonizing minutes standing outside the incubator, praying, before I had to wipe my face, swallow my panic, and race all the way back to the courthouse. The emotional whiplash was absolute torture. I was oscillating between the primal terror of a mother and the cold execution of a corporate assassin. When the session resumed, Wren was wheeled into the courtroom. She looked frail, draped in an oversized sweater, her face completely drained of color. When she took the stand, Grant's lead counsel practically salivated. He did not ask her about the coercion. He asked her, point blank, if she had sat in her living room and explicitly lied to her legal spouse about the paternity of the twins. Wren gripped the microphone. She wept openly. "Yes," she whispered. "Did you willingly deceive Miss Nelson to secure a more lucrative lifestyle?" The lawyer barked. "I was terrified," Wren sobbed. "I was forced." "But you lied," the lawyer stated loudly, cutting her off. "You are a proven, admitted liar. Nothing you say in this courtroom today can be trusted." Wren shattered on the stand. Her credibility was completely annihilated in less than 10 minutes. Grant leaned back in his leather chair, a microscopic, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully buried the truth under her ruined reputation. Then, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Every head turned. Celeste Whitmore walked slowly down the center aisle. She wore a sharp charcoal blazer and carried a sealed, heavy manila envelope. She did not look at her husband. She walked straight to the wooden partition and handed the envelope directly to June. June stood up, addressing the bench. She submitted a new, unlisted exhibit. It was a stack of internal emails and preliminary legal drafts procured directly from the Whitmore family office. The judge adjusted his glasses and read the top page. The color slowly drained from his face. The documents were drafted petitions for the formal legitimation of an out-of-wedlock biological heir. They were time-stamped 2 full weeks before Wren had even announced her pregnancy to me, let alone to the public. It was physical. Undeniable proof that Grant was legally preparing to absorb a child into his estate long before his supposed romantic affair ever produced one. Grant's smirk vanished. He sat bolt upright, his face flashing pale. Sensing the shift in the room, June delivered a brutal, blocking combination right before the clock ran out. She rapidly entered 3 more pieces of evidence into the provisional record. She submitted the biological transport logs from Laurel Creek. She submitted the wire transfer receipts routed through the shady medical broker. Finally, she lifted a small audio device and pressed play. She only let it run for 10 seconds, just enough for the judge to hear Grant's chilling recorded voice threatening to ruin Wren with fabricated vendor files if she did not execute the plan perfectly. The courtroom erupted into total chaos. Grant's lawyers were shouting, objecting wildly, claiming the recording was inadmissible and illegally obtained. The judge slammed his wooden gavel down with explosive force, demanding order. "Enough," the judge boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. "The temporary restraining order blocking Mr. Whitmore from the hospital remains firmly in place. Status quo is maintained. We are adjourning for the day. I want a full, comprehensive evidentiary hearing tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock sharp." The session was dismissed. I packed my briefcase with shaking hands. As I walked out through the heavy double doors into the marble corridor, I heard a sound I had never heard before. It was Grant Whitmore. The polished, untouchable chief executive officer had completely cracked. He was backed against a marble pillar, his face flushed dark red, screaming at the top of his lungs at his lead defense attorney. The mask of power was gone. He was finally backed into a corner, and the fire he had started was about to burn him alive. The final evidentiary hearing convened precisely at 9 o'clock on Friday morning. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from hostile debate to an impending execution. June Barrett did not just present an argument. She conducted a methodical, surgical dismantling of a monster. She laid out the complete, unbreakable chain of evidence. She connected the original embryo creation logs to the fabricated Internet Protocol metadata of my forged signature. She traced the massive sum of money from the Whitmore family office directly through the shadow broker and into the private accounts of the clinic administrators. She called Dr. Owen Pike, the executive director of Laurel Creek Fertility Institute, to the witness stand. At first, Dr. Pike sat tall, exuding the arrogant confidence of a man who believed his medical license made him invincible. He categorically denied any knowledge of forged consent. He claimed the transfer was standard operational procedure based on the documents provided by his patient. June let him finish his lie. Then, she projected the recovered server backups onto the courtroom monitor, placing them right next to the corresponding wire transfer receipts. She asked him to explain why a routine embryo transfer required an anonymous, offshore payment of $250,000. Dr. Pike stared at the screen. The color drained from his face. His arrogant posture collapsed. Under the crushing threat of federal perjury and the complete destruction of his medical career, he finally broke. His voice trembled as he confessed into the microphone. He admitted he accepted the money to intentionally bypass the standard spousal verification protocols and expedite a highly irregular, non-standard implantation. That confession was the nail in the coffin. But June was determined to bury the casket. She introduced the full, unedited audio recording Wren had given me. The entire courtroom fell dead silent as Grant Whitmore's voice echoed off the wood-paneled walls. The recording laid bare his entire sociopathic strategy. The judge listened to Grant explicitly instruct Wren to manipulate my insecurities, to fabricate the affair, and to wait until after the babies were born to finalize the legal cleanup. He referred to my children as strategic assets. He referred to me as an obstacle to be neutralized. It was the fatal blow. Grant's lead attorney simply closed his legal pad and stopped objecting. There was nothing left to defend. The judge did not even retreat to his chambers to deliberate. He delivered his ruling directly from the bench, his voice dripping with absolute disgust. He issued an emergency, permanent order legally recognizing me as the sole genetic mother of the twins. I was granted immediate, exclusive medical decision-making authority. Grant Whitmore was permanently barred from accessing the children, the hospital ward, or any related medical records. His fraudulent claims of paternity were completely dismissed with prejudice. As for Wren, the judge maintained a strictly logical approach. He acknowledged her biological role as the gestational carrier, meaning her legal rights could not simply be erased from existence. However, given her admitted participation in massive medical fraud and her proven vulnerability to severe external coercion, the court placed a rigid, temporary supervisory mechanism over any future maternal claims she might pursue. She would not be allowed to take the children. She would have to prove her psychological stability and independence through months of heavily monitored legal channels before she could even request visitation. While the gavel came down in family court, a completely different execution was happening in the corporate world. Celeste Whitmore had not waited for the trial to end. Armed with the financial dossiers proving Grant embezzled millions of dollars from company infrastructure to fund his illegal legacy program, she bypassed her husband entirely and went straight to the Halcyon Brand Systems Board of Directors. They called an emergency vote before lunch. Grant was immediately suspended, escorted out of his own skyscraper by corporate security, and permanently stripped of his chief executive officer title. By Monday morning, multiple state and federal investigative agencies had opened formal criminal inquiries into identity theft, massive medical fraud, health data privacy violations, and the illegal trafficking of reproductive materials. Grant went from being a man who controlled every narrative to a radioactive liability. His lawyers dropped him, his board abandoned him, his wife began the process of dismantling his remaining estate. There was no loud celebration for me. There was no champagne popping or triumphant shouting. True victory rarely looks like a movie scene. It looks like exhaustion, quiet relief, and the terrifying reality of moving forward. I retained a massive civil litigation firm to sue Grant and the Laurel Creek Clinic for everything they were worth. I took the initial, massive settlement funds and immediately established an ironclad trust for the twins. I rented a quiet, sunlit apartment exactly 2 blocks away from the hospital. I took an extended leave of absence from Alderstone Risk Analytics. My spreadsheets and risk models were replaced by the delicate, terrifying task of learning how to keep 2 premature infants alive. Life settled into a grueling, beautiful routine. I spent every waking hour in the neonatal intensive care unit. I learned how to read oxygen monitors, how to hold a fragile body wrapped in wires, and how to change diapers the size of a credit card. I watched them fight, and I watched them grow stronger every single day, fueled by the exact same stubborn resilience that runs through my veins. Months later, the heavy hospital machinery was finally gone. I was sitting in the rocking chair in the nursery of my new apartment. The room was bathed in the soft silver light of the moon. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. The city outside was completely silent. I had one baby sleeping soundly against my chest, and I was feeding the other from a warm bottle. My phone vibrated softly on the small wooden table next to me. The screen lit up the dark room. It was an unknown number calling. It was probably a federal investigator or another lawyer needing a statement for the ongoing criminal trials. I looked at the glowing screen, but my pulse stayed steady. No drop in my stomach, no surge of panic. I silenced the call and looked back down at the tiny, perfect face resting against my arm. The first time a phone rang at 3 o'clock in the morning, It stole my marriage and shattered the reality I thought I knew. The second time a phone rang at 3 o'clock in the morning, it gave me back the absolute truth, my rightful motherhood, and a version of myself that could never be broken again. Thank you so much for listening to this story to the very end. Please comment down below and let me know where you are listening from so we can interact and share our thoughts together. Do not forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting the hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.